Gary took the last check, $2,300, right there in the courthouse hallway after the decree was signed. His lawyer watched, expressionless. My apartment lease was up Friday. He tucked the money into his breast pocket, a smirk playing on his lips. Guess some people just aren't cut out for keeping their own money. Sarah, he murmured. His eyes cold and distant. The smell of lemon polish clung to Sarah's hands as she moved through Ben Carter's mansion. 35 years old, a year past her divorce from Gary, and still feeling the weight of his forgotten debts. The accounting degree, earned late at night through online courses, remained a framed piece of paper in her small, utilitarian room off the kitchen. It was tucked behind a worn copy of the federal tax code, which she often studied in secret, her fingers tracing numbers on a pad, imagining a different sort of life. Each dollar saved, tucked into an old coffee tin, was a small victory against the tide of her circumstances. Ben Carter, the man who owned these vast, echoing spaces, was 42. His success was evident in the polished marble and the art that lined the walls, but his presence was colder than any winter wind off Lake Michigan. His steel-gray eyes held a look that seemed to have seen too much, or perhaps nothing at all. Sarah watched him, unseen, as he navigated his own house. Sometimes, late at night, she'd hear the low murmur of his phone calls, followed by the soft, rhythmic creak of his pacing in the hallway outside his study. Other times, he would stand for long stretches in the doorway of a room at the end of the hall, a room kept pristine, but never truly used. It was his estranged daughter's room, Martha had once confided, a quiet detail Ben himself never mentioned. There was a small, faded photograph on the dresser, a porcelain teacup placed beside it, collecting dust Ben never seemed to notice. This morning, the usual quiet was shattered. Sarah was wiping down the chrome in the vast, professional-grade kitchen when Ben's voice cut through the air from the entry hall. His tone was sharp, a controlled explosion. "What do you mean she canceled? The dinner is in 6 hours." The words echoed off the marble, bouncing back into the kitchen, carrying the heat of his irritation. A heavy receiver clattered back onto its base. Sarah paused, her cloth still. He stormed into the kitchen, a rare occurrence. His eyes, usually distant, suddenly landed on her. A flicker of something she couldn't quite place. It had been months since he'd truly looked at her. He seemed to assess her, not as the housekeeper he paid, but as an object, a potential solution. "Sarah," he said, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. He paused, his gaze calculated, sweeping over her practical uniform. "How old are you?" 35, Mr. Carter, she replied, her voice steady despite the unexpected scrutiny. He nodded slowly, a thought solidifying in his expression. He turned sharply to Martha, the mansion's chef, who had just stepped in from the pantry. Martha, a robust woman with kind eyes and a laugh that could fill a room, had once owned her own popular restaurant before taking on this quieter role. She was Sarah's closest thing to a friend in this silent house. "Martha, take Sarah into town. She needs something suitable for dinner this evening. A business dinner. Something inconspicuous. And silent. Don't let her embarrass me," Ben instructed, his voice flat, already dismissing her from his mind as he turned to retrieve his phone again. Martha's brow furrowed. She watched Ben retreat, then turned to Sarah, a sympathetic look in her eyes. "Girl, what did you do to deserve this?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. "Come on, let's go find you something less like a cleaning rag." The drive to the department store was a blur of highway and Martha's low commentary on Ben's recent moods. Inside the brightly lit store, surrounded by racks of clothing Sarah never considered for herself, Martha took charge. She pulled a midnight blue dress from a display, the fabric soft and flowing. It fit perfectly, skimming her curves without clinging. A cut that felt both elegant and understated. Next came a string of classic pearls, cool against her skin, and then, surprisingly, a pair of Jimmy Choos. Sarah expected discomfort, but they were surprisingly balanced, almost a part of her. From there, Martha drove them to a small salon tucked away on a side street. "Leo's a genius," Martha announced, pushing open the glass door. Leo, a slight man with nimble fingers and a quiet, intense focus, worked magic. He shaped her hair into a soft, elegant style, then applied makeup that enhanced her features without masking them, transforming her face from the invisible housekeeper to someone composed and refined. When she looked in the mirror, it wasn't just the clothes or the hair. The woman staring back had different eyes, a subtle lift to her chin. It was Sarah, but also not. A strange new sense of power, quiet and unfamiliar, settled in her bones. She felt like a carefully wrapped package, ready to be delivered. Martha gave her a final appraisal, a warm, knowing smile on her face. She placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, her grip firm. "You're smarter than half those business types, and you know it. Now stand up straight." The valet at Morton's, a man with too much polish in his hair, opened the car door. The restaurant hummed with a low, expensive chatter. As Ben and Sarah walked through the heavy oak doors, he glanced at her, a quick, almost imperceptible flicker in his steel-gray eyes. It was a look of surprise, perhaps even a trace of approval, that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The midnight blue dress felt foreign on her, the heels a precarious balance. Her stomach tightened with a nervousness she hadn't felt in years, a prickle of unease as she remembered Ben's instructions, inconspicuous and silent. "Don't embarrass me." The words echoed in the marble foyer of the restaurant. They were led to a corner table, already occupied by two men. Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato rose as Ben approached, their bows precise. Their suits were impeccably tailored, their faces composed, observant. They seemed to take everything in without appearing to scrutinize. Sarah sat opposite Ben, the crisp, white tablecloth, a stark barrier between her and the hushed conversation. The dinner began with small talk, then quickly shifted to the intricacies of the deal. Ben spoke with an economy of words, each one carrying weight. He laid out figures, projected growth, and outlined market share with a quiet authority that commanded attention. Sarah listened, her mind clicking, connecting the dots. She recognized the names of companies, the projections. This was the same data she'd processed, organized, and filed away in his office for years. She saw the careful construction of his arguments, the subtle shifts in his negotiation strategy. Details she had observed peripherally, but now saw in action. Her accounting degree, usually gathering dust, felt suddenly alive in her mind, allowing her to follow the complex numbers and legal jargon with surprising ease. She found herself silently cross-referencing mental notes, almost as if she were auditing the conversation. The conversation flowed, and as the main course arrived, the professional facade softened slightly. Mr. Tanaka, a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, steered the conversation to a more personal tangent. "Mr. Carter," he began, his English precise. "Your family? I trust they are well?" Ben's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He took a sip of water before answering, his voice clipped. "My ex-wife is fine. And my daughter, she's away at school." The words were delivered like a formality, a required response, offering no real information. He quickly shifted, asking Mr. Tanaka about his company's expansion into eastern markets. But Mr. Sato, sharper, more direct, turned his gaze to Sarah. "And you, Miss Miller, do you have family here in the city?" His question hung in the air, unexpected. Sarah felt a sudden jolt. The silence at the table stretched, filled only by the distant clinking of cutlery. She recalled Ben's instruction to be silent. But Martha's words, "You're smarter than half those business types," echoed too. She took a breath, feeling the soft fabric of the dress, the unfamiliar weight of the pearls. "I'm divorced," she began, her voice clearer than she expected. The words came out, slow and deliberate. "But my family, they're my strength now. My chosen family." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. Martha was a kind of family. The quiet ambition she nurtured, the numbers in her head, they were part of her strength too. Ben turned his head, a quick, sharp movement. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, unreadable. Then, he smoothly, almost imperceptibly, took control again. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice firm, "about the clauses regarding intellectual property rights in the new agreement." The conversation snapped back to business, the personal interlude quickly forgotten, or at least, professionally ignored. Sarah felt a peculiar satisfaction, a small victory in her quiet assertion. Later, in the silent hum of Ben's luxury sedan, the city lights streaking past, Ben broke the quiet. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. "You handled yourself well tonight, Sarah," he said, his voice low, without inflection. The words hung in the air, a simple statement of fact, yet they landed with unexpected weight. A flicker of something warm spread through Sarah, a small, unfamiliar validation. It was not a compliment delivered with warmth, but an acknowledgement, rare and significant, from a man who rarely acknowledged anything beyond business. The rest of the drive back to the mansion remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence. Less lonely, less heavy. It was a shared space, contained within the polished interior of the car. Sarah looked out at the familiar streets, the quiet houses, the contrast between her old, invisible life, the one she had lived just hours ago, and this unexpected foray into Ben's world felt stark. She still smelled of lemon polish, but now also of expensive perfume. The quiet dynamic of the mansion began to shift. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Instead of a curt instruction or a gesture, Ben started using her name. Sarah. The dry cleaning. Sarah? Is the morning paper in the study? It wasn't a frequent occurrence, but the sound of her name on his tongue, spoken directly, broke through the usual silence that defined their interactions. He started small gestures. A Tuesday morning, he paused in the kitchen doorway as she prepared his coffee. A rare occurrence. "Anything interesting happened today, Sarah?" he asked, not quite looking at her, but waiting for an answer. She murmured a vague reply about the weather. Later, she would find specific documents, spreadsheets mostly, left casually on the corner of his study desk, not in the usual to-be-filed pile, but placed almost as if for her to glance at. She understood. She'd always had an eye for his reports. She'd meticulously organized them for years, the figures and projections becoming almost familiar. Now, he seemed to be inviting her to see them more closely. She felt his gaze more often, too. Not overtly, not a stare, but a lingering presence. A silent observation when she moved through the house. Sometimes, while dusting the library, she'd feel the prickle on the back of her neck, turning to find him in the doorway, a book in his hand, his steel-gray eyes on her for a moment longer than necessary before he'd turn away. It made her skin tingle, a mix of discomfort and a strange, unfamiliar awareness. One evening, as the late summer lights softened the edges of the manicured garden, Sarah sat on a stone bench, a worn paperback in her hands. She was deep into the story, when Ben's voice, low and unexpected, startled her. "Anything good?" he asked, standing a few feet away, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. She closed the book, her heart thumping. "Just a novel," she replied, feeling a blush creep up her neck. He walked closer, settling onto the adjacent bench, an unusual intimacy for them. "I used to read more," he mused, a rare softness in his voice. "Before everything." He asked about the plot, then, unexpectedly, shifted to current affairs, then to a recent article about the housing market. He listened when she spoke, not interrupting, his gaze fixed on her. It wasn't a conversation with an employee. It was a conversation with an equal. Their discussions deepened over the following weeks. Often, he'd find her in the kitchen after dinner, or in the study while she was tidying up. He would ask her opinion on a market trend, or a geopolitical situation he'd seen on the news. Sarah, drawing on her years of silent observation and her quiet study of financial texts, found herself subtly offering insights. When he showed her a draft of a quarterly report, she pointed out a minor discrepancy in the cash flow statement, a detail his own finance team had missed. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, registered a genuine surprise, then a flicker of respect. "Good catch, Sarah," he'd said, making a note. The professional boundaries began to blur, slowly, almost imperceptibly, replaced by an unspoken understanding that hummed beneath the surface of their daily tasks. Late one Tuesday night, well past Martha's departure, Ben called for her from his study. "Sarah, could you give me a hand with these?" he asked, gesturing to a mountain of legal and financial documents spread across his large mahogany desk. My eyes are going crossed. She poured them both coffee, the strong, dark brew filling the air. They worked in a comfortable, intimate silence. The only sounds the rustle of papers, the click of a stapler, and the soft hum of the mansion's distant systems. The quiet stretched, not awkward, but companionable. A shared space. Sarah felt an undeniable pull towards his sharp, formidable intelligence, but also, in these quiet moments, she glimpsed a vulnerability, a weary intensity that sometimes softened his features. At one point, as they both reached for the same file, their hands brushed. It was a fleeting contact, accidental, but a jolt went through Sarah, a momentary electric current. Her breath hitched. She looked up, and his eyes, usually so guarded, met hers, holding a flicker of something she couldn't name. It was dangerous, alluring, a quiet, insistent hum that resonated deep within her. This feeling, she knew, was a threat to the carefully constructed future she was trying to build, a future free from dependence and messy entanglements. After Ben finally retired for the night, leaving her to finish tidying the study, Sarah stood amidst the quiet order, the scent of coffee and old paper lingering in the air. She traced a finger over the smooth mahogany. "This isn't just about work anymore," she whispered to herself, the words feeling heavy in the empty room. The evening started like any other. The last of the dinner dishes had been cleared, Martha had gone home, and the mansion settled into its familiar silence. But the silence in Ben's study was different. She had brought him a last glass of whiskey, finding him hunched over his desk, the pale glow of the computer screen illuminating his drawn face. A major deal, one he had been pursuing for months, had fallen through. He didn't speak, but the lines of defeat around his mouth, the unusual slump of his shoulders, spoke volumes. "Everything all right, Mr. Carter?" she had asked, her voice softer than usual. He looked up, his eyes clouded with a raw frustration she had never witnessed. "No, Sarah, not at all." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "It's all crumbling." She hesitated, then moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder, a purely impulsive gesture of comfort. The crisp linen of his shirt was warm beneath her fingers. He leaned into her touch. A slow, almost imperceptible movement. Then, he turned, his hand reaching for hers, his grip surprisingly tight. The next moment was a blur of unspoken desire, a sudden, powerful current that had been simmering beneath their careful interactions for weeks. He pulled her gently, and she found herself in his arms, the scent of whiskey and his familiar cologne enveloping her. His lips were on hers, demanding, desperate. The kiss broke every professional boundary, every careful line she had drawn. Their secret relationship began in the hushed aftermath, a heady mix of excitement, the sharp tang of guilt, and a forbidden longing that consumed her. It was a dance of stolen moments, clandestine meetings after Martha had left, or when the other staff were on their breaks, whispered conversations in the study late at night, a lingering touch in the hallway when they thought no one was looking, quick, intense embraces hidden in the shadows of unused rooms. The mansion, once a symbol of her invisible life, became a stage for a dangerous, exhilarating game. Sarah wrestled with the moral implications. She knew, somewhere in the back of her mind, that this was wrong, but the loneliness she had carried since Gary, the quiet desperation for connection, blurred the edges of her judgment. Ben was lonely too, she reasoned. They understood each other in a way no one else did. He saw her, truly saw her. Not just as the housekeeper, he valued her mind, her quiet insights. This connection felt real, a refuge from the emotional wasteland her life had become. He filled her head with promises, vague but intoxicating. Sitting on the edge of his massive bed, the city lights a distant glitter, he would talk of a future. "This old life, it's not for me anymore," he'd murmur, tracing patterns on her arm. "We could build something different, you and I, away from all this." He spoke of shedding his responsibilities, of a new beginning, always with her by his side. She imagined a life where her accounting degree was put to use, where she was a respected partner, not just the housekeeper. she started to dream again. Of a small office of her own. Of evenings spent discussing business strategies with Ben. Of a life free from the constant threat of invisibility. She confided subtly in Martha, choosing her words carefully, hinting at a deepening connection with Ben. Martha listened, her face unreadable, her hands kneading dough for tomorrow's bread. "Be careful, honey," Martha said, her voice low, a mix of caution and a resignation that spoke of long experience. "Men like him, they have a way of taking what they want. And you might not even realize what's gone until it's too late." But Sarah, blinded by this new hope and the heady rush of affection, dismissed Martha's warnings. Ben was different with her. He was vulnerable, he was kind in his own guarded way, and he saw a future with her. This wasn't some casual dalliance, this was a bond forged in shared loneliness and mutual respect, or so she told herself. The affair, despite their best efforts at secrecy, became an unspoken truth among the mansion staff. Sarah caught Martha's knowing glances, the quick averted eyes of the cleaning crew, the subtle shift in their demeanor when she and Ben were in the same room. It was never discussed, never acknowledged out loud, but the atmosphere in the house had changed. They all knew, and Sarah, for the first time, felt truly seen, even if it was through a veil of judgment. Months bled into each other, marked by the changing seasons outside the mansion windows, and by the evolving, increasingly complicated rhythm of their affair. There were moments of genuine joy, soft touches, and whispered confessions in the dark, that gave Sarah a fragile sense of belonging she hadn't felt since before Gary. But as time wore on, a darker pattern began to emerge. In the privacy of his study or his bedroom, Ben became possessive, his grip tight on her arm, his words demanding her full attention. Yet, in public, even when Martha or the other staff were present, he grew increasingly distant. Dismissive, his eyes would pass over her without recognition, his instructions clipped and impersonal. Sarah yearned for more than these hidden moments. She wanted the public acknowledgement, the concrete plan for the shared future he had vaguely promised. The dreams she had nurtured, of a life free from being the housekeeper, began to feel less like possibility and more like a cruel mirage. She pressed him for a decision. A timeline. "Ben," she'd ask, her voice hushed, "what about what we talked about? Our future?" He would grow evasive, his gaze shifting. "Timing, Sarah. Timing. Business pressures are immense right now. This new merger. It's all-consuming." He would kiss her then. A kiss meant to silence her questions, to lull her back into the comfortable, dangerous illusion. One Tuesday morning, while tidying his study, a task that had once felt intimate, now just felt hollow, Sarah found it. Tucked beneath a stack of business magazines, on a receipt from a high-end jewelry store, was the inscription, "For Anya." Always. It wasn't just the price tag, though it was staggering, nor the elegant script of the sales assistant. It was the name, Anya. It wasn't her. It wasn't for her. And it wasn't a casual text or a stray lipstick mark. This was a gift. Expensive, personal, and with a declaration. The realization hit her like a physical blow, a cold, hard truth settling in her gut. Ben was seeing other women, casually, carelessly. She was not his only. She was never his only. The dreams she had built, brick by fragile brick, shattered into 1,000 pieces. She was just another conquest, another fleeting distraction for a wealthy man. The betrayal was crushing, obliterating her trust, making a mockery of the fragile hope she had dared to feel. She felt used, discarded. That evening, she waited for him in the study, the crumpled receipt clutched in her hand. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was trembling, ragged with heartbreak and a nascent fury. "Who is she, Ben?" she demanded, pushing the receipt onto his desk. What was all of this? What were we? He looked at the receipt, then at her, his expression a familiar mask of indifference. He picked it up, examined it, then set it down. "A business acquaintance," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "An investment partner's daughter." He denied everything, not even a flicker of guilt in his steel-gray eyes. Then, the words that twisted the knife, minimizing their entire relationship, reducing her to her designated role. "You're the housekeeper, Sarah. Let's not confuse things." Her world collapsed. The carefully constructed future, the small office, the shared life, all turned to ashes in that single, cruel sentence. The tears that pricked her eyes were not just from heartbreak, but from a burning humiliation. He had not only exploited her emotionally, but reminded her precisely of her place, her social station. She saw the cruel power imbalance, the calculating nature of his emotional exploitation, the anger that had been simmering within her, quiet and simmering, now roared to life. It was a cold, hard flame. And if you're finding Sarah's story compelling, stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The insidious idea of paying the price began to form in her mind, quiet and steel-hard, a precise counterpoint to his casual cruelty. It wasn't about revenge, not truly. It was about balance. It was about making him understand the cost of treating people as disposable, about taking what was due. After Ben's cold dismissal, Sarah retreated into herself. The heartbreak was a hollow ache, but it was quickly overshadowed by a fierce, quiet resolve. The warmth that had briefly ignited within her was extinguished, replaced by something cold and hard, like granite. She had been foolish, naive, allowing herself to be consumed by a fantasy. Now, she would ensure he understood the cost of such callousness. She began to see Ben not as a lover, or even as her employer, but as a system, a complex network of assets and liabilities. His true vulnerability, she realized, was not his guarded heart. The vast, intricate web of businesses, investments, and dealings he had so carefully constructed. Her memory, honed by years of meticulous organization in his office, flooded her with details. The subtle corrections she'd made to his spreadsheets, the intricate breakdowns of his quarterly reports, the names of his most trusted and least trustworthy associates, the complex web of shell corporations he used to obscure certain assets. She possessed intimate knowledge of his finances, his deals, his most carefully guarded secrets. Her dusty accounting degree, once a symbol of unfulfilled potential, now became her most potent weapon. Her revenge wasn't born of impulsive anger, but of cold, calculated precision. She moved through the mansion with the same efficiency she always had, but now with a hidden purpose. In the dead of night, after Ben had retired, she would slip into his study. Using a small, silent camera, she photographed crucial documents, obscure contracts, questionable expense reports, suspicious email chains. She copied financial records onto a tiny flash drive, each file a brick in the wall she was building around him. The invisibility he had always taken for granted, her silent presence in his home, became her ultimate camouflage. She was a ghost in his machine, learning its every function, its every weakness. She learned of a critical, complex acquisition Ben was orchestrating, a deal that could make or break him. It involved merging his primary holding company with a smaller, highly innovative tech firm, a move designed to massively expand his market reach and solidify his power. It was the linchpin of his next 5 years, a gamble he had staked everything on. Martha, observant as ever, caught the change in Sarah's demeanor. There was a sharpness to her eyes, a tautness in her jaw. "What are you planning, honey?" Martha asked one afternoon, watching Sarah meticulously clean a rarely used silver tea set. "You look like you're going to war." Sarah paused, her fingers tracing the intricate engraving on a spoon. She met Martha's gaze, her own eyes steely, revealing nothing, just making sure no one else gets confused about their place. "Martha," she replied, her voice low and even. Martha simply nodded, a slow, knowing nod, and went back to her work. Sarah began to act. From a public library computer, always careful to use a VPN, she started to anonymously leak strategic damning information. Not everything at once, but carefully chosen morsels. Insider trading hints to a rival investment firm, details of environmental regulatory breaches to a vigilant government agency. Subtle, yet undeniable, inconsistencies in his financial disclosures to a major media outlet. Each leak was a carefully placed brick, designed to chip away at the foundation of his empire, to disrupt his crucial acquisition. She used the lessons from her accounting courses, her years of meticulous organization to ensure her tracks were covered, the anonymous email addresses, the proxy servers, the burner phones. Each step was executed with the precision of a seasoned operative. The plan was not merely to wound Ben, to inflict a personal slight. It was to dismantle the very foundation of his perfect, unfeeling world, to make him pay a price far beyond mere emotional distress. She wanted him to feel the cold, hard reality of what it was like to lose everything. The first tremors began subtly. Whispers of a regulatory inquiry. A sudden, inexplicable dip in stock prices, then an article in the financial press, hinting at unusual discrepancies in Ben Carter's subsidiary holdings. Ben's meticulously constructed empire, once seemingly invincible, began to falter under the relentless, mysterious leaks. He became frantic, his usual composure dissolving into restless pacing and increasingly agitated phone calls. His steel-gray eyes, once so cold and assured, now held a bewildered fear. He barked orders, hired expensive investigators, but the source of the insidious leaks remained maddeningly elusive, a ghost in his machine. His perfect world was crumbling, and he couldn't see the hand dismantling it. The climactic confrontation arrived on a gray, overcast afternoon. The mansion felt eerily quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. Ben sat in his study, a stack of subpoenas on his desk, his face pale, drawn. Sarah entered, carrying a freshly brewed pot of coffee, her movements deliberate, unhurried. She placed the pot on the tray, her hands steady. She looked at him, truly looked at him. For the last time as an employee, it was me. Ben, she said, her voice clear, steady, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. He looked up, startled, his eyes wide with a confusion that rapidly morphed into disbelief, then a terrible dawning comprehension. "What?" he whispered, the single word, hoarse. She met his gaze directly, unflinching. "You called me furniture, Ben," Sarah stated, the words unspooling with the quiet power of undeniable truth. The memory of his cruel dismissal, the casual cruelty, burned in her mind. But furniture can still hold secrets, and sometimes it remembers. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, the carefully constructed facade of his self-importance shattering. His fortune, his reputation, his life's work, everything he valued, was obliterated by the woman he had deemed invisible. "How could you, Sarah?" he asked, his voice choked with raw disbelief and the profound weight of his loss. "Why? You taught me how, Ben," she replied, her voice unwavering. "You taught me to see everything, every number, every discrepancy, every quiet detail you thought no one noticed, and you taught me the price of invisibility." Her words hung in the air. A final, unarguable judgment. He had built his kingdom on ignoring those beneath him, and now, one of those unseen figures had brought it down. As she walked out of the study, leaving him amidst the ruins of his ambition, Sarah felt the moral weight of her actions. It was a heavy burden, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it was balanced, precisely, by a profound sense of justice, a quiet satisfaction that resonated deep within her bones. She hadn't sought revenge out of petty spite, but out of a need to reclaim her dignity, to assert her existence. Months later, the Midwest felt like a distant dream. Using her carefully saved money, supplemented by some of Ben's cleverly reallocated assets she had uncovered, and fueled by her sharp intellect, Sarah started her own financial consulting firm, not in Chicago, but in Boston, a city of history and new beginnings, a world away from Ben's crumbling empire. The vision from the story's opening, the quiet yearning for a life beyond Gary's debts and Ben's shadow, had finally manifested. She stood in her penthouse apartment, not as large as Ben's, but entirely her own, overlooking the sparkling expanse of Boston Harbor. She was no longer an invisible, broken housekeeper, but a powerful, independent woman, a respected professional. The price she had paid was high. Her innocence, the trust she had once foolishly placed in others. But Ben's arrogance was shattered, his kingdom irrevocably lost, and she had emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. She found a quiet, hard-earned peace, a new understanding of self-worth, and a clearer grasp of the true, complex meaning of morality. Sometimes, she mused, looking out at the glittering city lights reflecting on the water. The only way to build a new life is to watch the old one burn, and then rise from the ashes, stronger. Sometimes, on a quiet Tuesday morning, in her penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, Sarah still caught herself. The sunlight, reflecting off the water, danced across the walls, a stark contrast to the sterile gleam of Ben Carter's marble floors, which she had polished countless times. 5 years had passed since that day in his study, and the woman who now managed her own thriving financial consulting firm felt a world away from the invisible housekeeper. She had built this life brick by careful brick, using the same meticulous precision she had once employed to dismantle Ben's empire. The heavy moral weight of her actions still lingered, a quiet hum beneath the surface of her success, but it was balanced by a hard-earned peace. She had traded her innocence and her misplaced trust for justice, for a future where she was seen, respected, and entirely her own. Ben, stripped of his kingdom, was a cautionary tale she rarely thought of. The price of his arrogance had been his entire world. The price of her invisibility had been everything she had to lose, and everything she had to gain.